there's two times in my early career when difficult conversations have drastically changed the course of my career. And they both happened within 2 weeks of each other. So the first time I was ever a leader in technology, I became a leader incredibly early, probably too early. I was 24 years old and running a team of 10 engineers. And I had no idea what I was doing at all. Absolutely none. What 24-year-old knows how to be an employee knows how to be an engineer, let alone be a leader. So I was running a team of 10 people, no idea what I was doing. And one of my new hires was incredibly disruptive to the dynamic of the team. I see all of this now looking back on it. Didn't notice it at the time. They were the typical nerd, kind of A-level geek who was somebody who just really got on everybody's nerves. To the point where my best engineer at the time actually ended up quitting because they couldn't get along with this person. And I say this is a difficult conversation, but it's actually a difficult conversation that I didn't have. I bailed out of talking to this person time and time and time again. I knew they were a bad hire, I knew they were causing a bad dynamic in the team, and yet I didn't have this conversation with them. I was completely bailed. Then about 2 weeks later, my boss pulled me into a room and said, "Andrew, what's your job?" When your boss pulls you into a meeting room and asks you the question, "What's your job?" that's never a good thing. No, that's never gonna be something that, you know, you go into that with a sense of happiness and excitement. I was terrified. And so I said to my boss, you know, this is me, 24 years old, tech lead across a team of 10 engineers. My job is to write code. It's like, no, it's not your job. You're a tech lead. Your job isn't to write code. You're a tech lead. What's your job, Andrew? So I thought about it for a minute. Okay, I'm a tech lead. I'm a tech lead. I'm not just an engineer. I'm a tech lead. What's my job? To write really good code. No. Luckily for me, this could have been me being fired. But in fact, it turned into an incredibly fruitful coaching relationship between me and my boss, where my boss recognized and understood that I had no idea what I was doing and took me under his wing and taught me what it meant to be a tech lead. So one difficult conversation I didn't have with the disruptive new hire changed the way that I thought about that dynamic. One difficult conversation that I was partaking in with my leader at the time, my manager at the time, completely changed the way that I think about leadership. So that's why difficult conversations are important. But let's talk a little bit more about why we're getting here today to talk about it. That's how they changed me. I want to talk about how they're going to change you and how they could change you. So vaguely, this is the discussion we're going to go through tonight, which is the what and why. What are difficult conversations? Why are they important? I'm going to go through the difference between mindset and preparation when you approach a difficult conversation, why both of them are important, and what both of them mean. I'll take you through a model that I put together to help you with this. I'm an engineer by trade and by training and by experience. I've been a coder for about 20-something years at this point, been paid to do it for a little bit less than that. And models and algorithms are how I think and how I feel and how I spend my day. And so when it comes to solving people problems, like difficult conversations, I like to find models and algorithms as to how I approach solving them. So I'll take you through that. And then we'll do a Q&A at the end. I'm not 100% sure on the timing of this talk, so we'll play it by ear how we do that. And then, you know, we'll have enough time for Q&A. But if we run out, this is why we have after discussions. So this isn't a monologue. I really don't like talks where I stand here for 45 minutes and talk at you. I don't want this to be that. I want you to engage. I want you to interrupt me, ask questions. This should be a dialogue, a conversation, not a monologue. So please, at any point, hand up or just shout out, whatever you feel comfortable, and we'll do that.
May I interrupt, please?
Always.
First, my English is broken, but no worries. I am ignorant about tech, but I am here. This
Sure.
is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
And Many silly questions, but starting with one more is no. Okay.
Go for it.
Difference in between model and algorithm. Very
Sure.
simple.
Sure.
If it's possible.
Yeah, so I guess a model would be a way of thinking about things, but an algorithm might be how you execute on that model. Does anybody want to challenge my interpretation there? Because I just thought about that on the fly as the question was asked. No? All right, cool. We'll stick with that for now. If I change my mind, I'll talk to you about it afterwards. So who am I? So I'm Andrew Murphy. Being a father to a flock of chickens for quite a few number of years, father to a flock of humans for a bit less than that. Love travel, love spending time, so much so that I actually, you can tell from the accent, I am English, but I spent the past decade in Australia. Intend on staying there, intend on spending as much time as I can there. But I'm back in the UK because I have a new son and I'm showing him around to the family. So that's why I'm here. But I love travel, and you'll see travel come up in the talk a little bit. Me, from a more professional kind of point of view, like I said, I've been a coder a very, very long time. I started coding on a ZX Spectrum, if anybody knows what they are. Yep, ZX Spectrum. I then had my first job as a Cold Fusion developer and then a VB6 developer, but I didn't let that hold me down and became a PHP developer. Eventually found my way to .NET at some point. And spent a lot of my time being a .NET engineer. But I've also been a tech lead for almost all of my career. Like I said, very, very early into leadership. Made a ton of mistakes, an absolute ton of mistakes on being a leader early on in my career. Fortunately, had a lot of help as well, a lot of mentors, a lot of guidance about what it means to be a leader. I've also been training people on these kinds of skills for the past 5 years or so. I find that in our industry, we have a big problem, which is the leaders kind of come up from the trenches like I did, and yet nobody sits down and says what my boss said to me 15 years ago, which is the job isn't what you think it is. Being a leader isn't just about being an excellent engineer. Being a leader is about a whole heap of other things as well. And as you progress in your career, it's more about those things and less about being an excellent engineer. Something we don't talk about enough in our industry. And so I started a career of training people these skills and teaching them how to be good at leadership. And one of the important things in being good at leadership is difficult conversations. So I actually started my own company, Debugging Leadership, that's focused on all this kind of stuff. And I started it because I genuinely believe this sentence, that happy and effective leaders build happy and effective teams. I think there's a virtuous cycle between these things. And that, if you've got somebody who is a happy and effective technical leader, the people under them, the people working with them are going to be happy and effective at what they do. And so everything that I've been doing for the past few years is focused on this. So, what are difficult conversations? This is not a monologue. What are difficult conversations? When I say that, what pops into your mind?
Expecting a bad outcome.
Ooh, interesting. So expecting a bad outcome, is it more fearing of a bad outcome? Is that another way of thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, fearing how the conversation's going to go.
Yeah.
And hence potentially making it difficult.
Fearing how it's going to go, yeah. Yeah, and why do you think you're fearing that outcome? What is it about that outcome that could make it fearful?
I just said giving negative feedback.
It's a good example. Good example.
Positive feedback isn't. I don't imagine many people find that difficult.
Yeah, most people are okay with giving positive feedback. Yeah, it's when you've got to tell somebody what they're doing isn't what you'd like them to do. That's when it can be a difficult conversation. Why are these two things related? What is it about giving somebody feedback? What is it about fearing the outcome that has this relationship?
Imbalance of power, where one can sack the other, not the other way around?
Sure. I mean, definitely that can be an attributor to difficult conversations. Not all difficult conversations, though, have that power disparity. You could be talking to a peer, you could be talking to somebody in a different team. Your wife? Well, I don't know, power dynamics. Let's not get into that. Let's leave that one well alone. But yeah, not all. It's definitely a contributing factor, but I'd say it's not a definition of difficult conversation. For me, a difficult conversation is exactly what you said. It's when the outcome has high stakes associated with it. It's when whether the conversation is successful or not has a significant impact on whatever you're trying to achieve. That's what a difficult conversation is. If it doesn't have an impact, then you're not going to be fearing it. You're not going to be worrying about it. You're just going to be like, maybe not, I'll talk about it. But if it's going to have a significant impact, that's when you start getting worried about it. And here are some examples of difficult conversations, and they all have this factor to it. So, giving feedback, exactly that example. Giving somebody feedback can be a difficult conversation. Doing a presentation can be a difficult conversation. High stakes for me. I could completely flub my words and end up you guys thinking I'm a complete idiot. That's a difficult conversation. Influencing somebody, talking to a peer, the example we were just talking about, trying to encourage somebody of something. Asking my boss for a promotion, as a boss denying somebody's promotion. Architectural decision making, not the decision itself, but the decision making. Talking to other people about something, discussing it, going through the different ways you could make this architectural decision can be a difficult conversation. I've got my opinion on how I want to do it. You've got your opinion on how you want to do it. And so that can be a difficult conversation. Could also be working style conversations. What I mean by that is, well, I like to start work at 10 a.m. You want to start work at 8 a.m. I want to have every conversation over Zoom. You want to have every conversation over Slack. That can be a difficult conversation. So this is really why I built this talk, is because this is the sort of stuff I've been training people to do for many, many years now. And I had this thought, this idea, this epiphany, that they're all related to one another. All of these conversations, even though they seem disparate and unconnected, are actually all very, very similar when you pull the layers back and you analyze what they're doing under the skin. They're all about high stakes conversations. They're all about things where the outcome is important, and there's a lot of emotion attached to them. Because if there isn't a lot of emotion attached to them, it's probably not a difficult conversation. Cool.
I was going to add back to what I said about the fear of the outcome. Even if it's not got a lot of stakes on you, sometimes the fear, now that you mentioned emotion, of what it's going to do to the receiver.
Yeah.
It could be that the outcome is already predefined, but it's going to have an impact on the other person.
Yeah, like if you're fired.
Like upsetting somebody is never.
Yeah.
It's never something comfortable, even if it doesn't directly affect you.
Definitely. I've through my career as a leader, I've let many people go, and that's never an easy conversation. It's not something that I ever look forward to doing, obviously, but it's also, like, for me, it's very emotionally challenging. For me, obviously, as well as the other person. And if I'm ever having that conversation with somebody, the night before, I'm not sleeping. I'm stressed out of my mind. I hate doing it with a passion. But sometimes you've got to do it. You don't have a choice. It's the right thing to do for the greater good, and the outcome's predetermined. So what happens if we don't have difficult conversations?
Within the box, inside the box, your own box.
Nothing changes. Yeah, that could definitely be one outcome.
It's like temporarily safe, isn't it?
Tell me why you say temporarily safe.
Because the problem doesn't go away.
In fact, sometimes what can happen? Gets worse. So, story time. I love travel. I absolutely adore travel. In fact, one of my few regrets with moving to Australia is this lovely, lovely machine here. I had to leave it behind when I went to Australia, and it was my love. It was the only vehicle that I've ever had that just walking past it made me smile. Just knowing that I owned this beast made me smile. And it had a roof tent on the top of it. And I used to go camping, used to go with friends camping, used to go with Ken camping. That's my car, that's Ken's car. I slept in the roof tent, Ken slept on the back seats. But I love this vehicle so much. And Ken and I actually went on a trip around Europe. It was the first trip I'd been on in a while. And we were driving through France, I think it was originally. And I hear this noise from the car. I'm like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'm enjoying myself. We're going through these cities. We're enjoying the countryside. We're sleeping next to lakes. It'll be fine. It's not a problem. Enjoying myself, driving through the countryside. Bang. Grinding halt in Lithuania in the middle of nowhere. No, not Lithuania, Luxembourg in the middle of nowhere. And I only just was able to limp to a garage. And fortunately for me, they had the exact part that I needed to fix the Land Rover. Just so happened to be a Land Rover garage within 2 miles of where I broke down. Very, very lucky. I'd broken the transfer box, which for those of you who know a lot about 4x4 cars is one of the most expensive things you can do to a car like a Land Rover. Luckily, they had a replacement part. Cost me many thousands of pounds to get that fixed. How much do you reckon it would have cost me to get it fixed if I'd have done something when I first heard the noise? Probably not many thousands of pounds. How much do you reckon it would have cost me to have got it fixed the second time I'd heard the noise? Probably not many thousands of pounds. But what I did was I ignored it. And the problem got worse. And I still ignored it. And the problem got worse. And I still ignored it. And then it reared its ugly head and cost me a lot of money and a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. Difficult conversations are like this. When we ignore them, typically what doesn't happen is they get better. They don't get better by themselves. They've got high stakes. They've got emotional connections. Emotions get worse with time when we stress and fret about something. So if you're ever having a difficult conversation in the horizon, in the future, think about it like a car problem. Think about it like something that the more you leave it, the worse it gets. Because that is almost always the case. If I've got a relationship problem with somebody, if I've got somebody in my team who is not acting like they should be acting, that they're not being as productive as they should be, they're not talking to the people around them like they should be talking. We all know these people who kind of struggle sometimes with compassionate communication, let's say. Those people don't get better at what they're doing and don't get better at their jobs unless we tell them and we talk to them and we treat them with compassion and explain it to them. So this is what happens with difficult conversations. So we talked about what it is. We talked about what happens when you don't do it. Lastly, before we get into the meat of this, I want to discuss this point. Be comfortable being uncomfortable. We've discussed that these things have high stakes, that they have emotions, that they're a conversation. The word conversation means multiple people. You don't have a conversation with yourself unless you're in a padded room somewhere. And so there's multiple people involved in this. What that means is there's always going to be this dynamic, this uncomfortable nature between you having this difficult conversation with somebody. If I'm giving you feedback, I'm going to feel uncomfortable about it. If I'm having a discussion with a peer that I'm going to tell them that I want to do something differently, it's going to be uncomfortable. And the reason why I say it's going to be uncomfortable is because we're human beings and we care about the other person. If I'm going to give you feedback and I've lost the emotional connection with you, if I don't care how you receive that feedback, I'm not going to be a good leader and I'm not going to have that difficult conversation in a compassionate way. So the goal of what we're discussing here is not about being comfortable telling somebody that they've got bad BO or being comfortable telling somebody that they're not producing the code of the quality you'd like to see. It's about being confident. Because to be comfortable It means you've disconnected that emotional connection with that other person. You've stopped caring about them. And I don't want you to be those types of people. I don't want you to not care about other people, but I do want you to be confident. I want you to feel like you're going into it prepared and in the right state of mind in order to have the conversation. There's a difference between those two things makes sense, confident and comfortable. Awesome. Okay. Let's delve into what we do about them. Mindset and preparation. These are the two things that I want you to run through your mind when you're approaching a difficult conversation. If I say the word mindset to you, what does that mean?
How you frame the situation in your mind.
Yeah, how you frame the situation in your mind, how you think about it. Your internal narrative might be a way of phrasing it. Like, what does this mean to you? How are you thinking about it? That's what I mean by mindset, exactly, spot on. So mindset is also about the courage to have the conversation in the first place. We talked about fearing these things and the high stakes involved. And so mindset's also, I'm actually going to have the conversation in the first place. Am I going to get over my fear and talk to this person? That's what I didn't do in the very first example that I shared with you. With this person that had just joined my team that was being a disruptive influence, I didn't have the courage to have the conversation. But mindset can be a bunch of other factors, and courage can be challenged in many different ways. So what are some of the things that can challenge our courage?
You mean make the courage turn into fear?
Yeah.
Thinking on the benefits you can take from the conversation and putting the shoes of the person you are going to talk it with.
That's great. That's the next point that we're going to go on to, but that's awesome. I love that. We're going to discuss that in a minute, because that is exactly how you get over the fear. But what are some of the things that can cause the fear in the first place?
Not being prepared.
Not being prepared.
But not being mentally prepared. If you know you're going to upset someone, how do you deal with that?
Yeah,
Or
definitely.
if you know they're going to be combative. Something
Yeah.
that is particularly given to being difficult, then
Yeah, we all know those people and the things that they're passionate about and that they have really strong opinions about. And we know that feeling that, oh, I'm going to talk to this person about this particular thing. I know exactly that they're going to get riled up, and this is going to be something that takes a long time to discuss rather than a quick discussion. Yeah, we discussed power dynamics earlier. Power dynamics can be another thing that can challenge our courage. If there's a disparate in power between the two people, if for example, if I'm talking to my boss, I might have a good relationship with my boss. And so even though there's a power dynamic there, it's not that challenging. But if I'm going to have to speak to my boss's boss, now this is somebody I don't spend a lot of time talking to. So I don't have that relationship, and that can be quite challenging and fear-invoking.
it's going to be a public conversation. It can be a challenge.
Yeah, we'll talk about public in a minute, but definitely if you have to have a difficult conversation in public, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that can definitely induce fear.
General assumption of the outcome.
Yeah.
So sort of playing almost right in the whole conversation and the response and everything
Yeah.
in your mind. How
Yeah.
it's going to go.
Sometimes, yeah, it's a really, really good point. Sometimes over-analyzing the situation can lead to fear, definitely. Before we go on, another big one is imposter syndrome. We have imposter syndrome. So we have this in our industry all the time, imposter syndrome. If I don't feel like I should be telling this person the thing that I'm telling them, that can be fearful. Imposter syndrome is massive. I have imposter syndrome all the time. Every day I have it multiple times. So exactly what was just mentioned there, what are some of the questions we can ask ourselves to help with our mindset? So it's a great example there. What do we want from this? What does the other person want from this? Why is it beneficial to them? Those are some excellent points you brought up. This is some of the things we can ask. And in fact, this is my list of questions to ask yourself to get over the mindset. You'll notice a lot of those that you just mentioned there are in this list. But I want to start with a really, really big one, which is, why is it in my best interest to have this conversation? Let's get a little bit of selfishness in there. Let's think about ourselves for a minute. You know, we're compassionate people. We're having this conversation because we want to help somebody. We want to make the team better. But let's just start with a little bit of selfishness. Why is it in our own best interest? That can help you just kickstart getting over that fear. Why is it in their best interest? Another great question. But also, why is it in the best interest of the team? You know, in my first example again, and also my second example, where my boss asked me what my job was, he was thinking there mostly about my team. And me understanding what it meant to be a leader and what the dynamic I was inadvertently creating was mostly about the team. And so he was having the conversation with me because it was beneficial for the team. Because me being a better leader helped the team. And just to nail the point home, we can also ask ourselves the inverse question. What happens if we don't have the difficult conversation? What's going to happen if we just leave it? If we wait till, you know, we're in Luxembourg and our Land Rover crashes on the side of the road? You can ask yourself that inverse question. Cool. Any questions on mindset before we move on? Great, awesome. So preparation. If I say preparation to you, what does that mean?
Getting all the information together, what you're going to talk about.
Yep, exactly that. Getting all the information together. What are you going to talk about? What are the things that you can gather to make this go as smooth and seamless as possible? Exactly. What are some of the things that can happen in a difficult conversation that will be better if we'd done that preparation? You kind of mentioned it a minute ago. Confidence, yeah, definitely. Sorry.
Thinking about the worst situation that can come out and how you can counter it.
Yeah. Perfect, exactly, yeah. What's the worst possible thing that could happen, and how do I make sure that I'm prepared for that? Yeah, if we don't think through that, then we're going to end up potentially sticky because something could happen we've not prepared for. So these are some of the things we can do to better prepare when we've got this. We can gather data, but we can also gather outside opinions. You know, a lot of these difficult conversations are not always clearly one way or another. There's a certain amount of opinion involved, and so gathering other people's perspectives can be a useful way to A, give yourself the confidence, but B, enable you to prepare for what's happening, especially if we're thinking worst case scenario. Thinking through possible objections, what could somebody say that disagrees with that, and also having multiple plans. It's kind of what you talked about earlier of you know, going too far with that could potentially lead you into a cycle of overanalyzing, but if we don't do any of it at all, then we're not prepared. So getting that right balance between preparation but not getting ourselves into an anxiety spiral is where we should be aiming for.
Is it possible that if you don't have the right mind frame to in the first place, that you could do a lot of preparation for like the wrong situation that you're imagining, and then you're just like creating a scenario where, you know, that doesn't actually just happen at all, and you're completely unprepared for the actual situation where it's nothing like that? Yeah, definitely,
definitely. And that's why mindset always comes first. A question which is implicit in this, but I'll make it explicit, is going into these situations and asking yourself the question, why are you doing this in the first place? What outcome do you want from this? What is this thing all about? Why are we doing it? Because you need that in order to be able to answer these questions. So to be able to frame why is it in my best interest, their best interest, you've got to know the outcome you want and why you want that outcome. And that'll help with what you're talking about of making sure that you're preparing in the right way. Cool. Any more questions on preparation before we move on?
What if it's not in there?
Ooh, good question.
So yeah, because
Well, I could philosophize about that for a very, very long time. There are definitely some times, we can talk about that over a pint of beer, but I will agree that there are some times when sacking somebody is not in their best interest. I will definitely agree that that is a possibility. Generally, it's not, but there are some times. So there it's a case of, it's going to happen anyway. This situation is happening. There's no way that this isn't happening. If there is, then you wouldn't be having the conversation in the first place. So then you're moving mode to going, why is it in their best interest that you're having the conversation with them? Why are you preparing them for this situation? Because the situation's an inevitability. The difficult conversation then becomes not necessarily telling them about the situation, but preparing them for it and making sure that they're in the right place to receive the information. There's a hell of a lot of a difference between you're fired and me making sure that I've prepared you adequately up to that point.
So the outcome might not be in the best interest, but the conversation is.
Correct. Yeah. Cool. All right, worksheet time. If you want to follow along on your computing device of choice, this is not a requirement. Everything will be on the slide deck. But if you desire to do so, there's a QR code that will take you to a PDF. It's also a good opportunity for me to take a slug of water. Like I said, not a requirement. Is that working for everybody? Yeah? Cool.
I feel ignorant.
So you don't need it. It's just sometimes it's easier to look at something on your phone rather than the projector screen. Cool. Okay, moving on. So this is a worksheet that I created that effectively takes you through everything we've just discussed in the past 10 minutes. It's there to enable you to prepare when you know there's a difficult conversation coming up. If you know you need to talk to somebody about something, or you need to tell somebody something, or you've got a difficult conversation coming, this worksheet is yours to use to ask you the questions and to prompt you and to make you think about it in the way that I've just discussed in this course. So, there's 3 pages, and each page takes you through a different aspect of the difficult conversation and asks you questions for you to answer. The PDF is fillable in if you want to do that, or if you live in the 20th century and like wasting ink and paper, you can print it off and fill it in with a pen. It's your choice. So let's go through the questions. So the first page is all about the actual difficult conversation itself. This is about framing it in your mind and making you think about it. But it's also about preparing for doing it in the right way. So the first couple of questions are just to get you to objectively think about what's going on, what this dynamic is, what this situation is. Why do we think this is objective? Why did I say the word objective there? A lot of these things can be difficult to get your brain out of being subjective and putting your own interpretations on it. If I'm giving feedback to somebody, the difference between giving them objective and subject feedback can be really hard to understand the difference between the two. Am I asking them to do something different because it's objectively the better thing to do, or because I think it's the better thing to do and there's no objective nature to it? It's really hard to work out sometimes. So trying to start with objectivity is the best way this is going to be successful. We can add subjectivity in later, but let's start with objectivity. The best way I can describe to you to do that is to imagine you were looking at the situation as it's being recorded on a camera, through a camera lens. If we look through a camera lens at a situation, we can't see internal monologue in somebody's head. We can't interpret what they were thinking and feeling, and we can only see their actions. And so describe the situation in terms of actions as opposed to thoughts and feelings, because we can't see thoughts and feelings, which makes them subjective, not objective. The next question is about who should be involved in this difficult conversation. This is to our point about public or not public. Whenever possible, these conversations should be not public. Giving somebody feedback shouldn't be in the middle of a public room. With some exceptions, you can build dynamics that makes that possible. But as a rule, difficult conversations should be in private. People respond better to this kind of stuff in a one-on-one or a small group dynamic than they do a large group dynamic. It's just human behavior. We feel like we've got to project more of an aura of authority and protect ourselves more in a group, whereas one-on-one you can have those trusting relationships that makes it easier to say challenging things to somebody. So when should we do it? Probably not 4:30 on a Friday. Nobody wants to be fired at 4:30 on a Friday. Nobody wants to be told that their BO is bad at 4:30 on a Friday. You go home and you spin about it all weekend and you don't have a very nice weekend. So, when you should have this conversation is also important. Also, if you're giving somebody feedback, the general rule is you give them feedback as soon as possible. The idea of a annual performance review where you give somebody feedback about something they did 11 months and 29 days before, it just doesn't work. So as soon as possible, but not at 4:30 on a Friday. Where should you do this? Should this be over Zoom? Should this be in person? Should this be at the end of a stand-up? Those are questions we can ask and depend on the situation. So you can see this first page is about the objective nature and the dynamics of the interaction. Because we're trying to get into here where and when and how and who should be involved in this conversation. So the next page is mindset, and these are the questions that I just took you through. These are exactly the same questions. Why is it in my own best interest? Why is it in their best interests? Why is it in the team's best interests? And what will happen if I don't? And I'll go through an example in a minute. So, preparation. These are exactly the questions I gave you a minute ago, just in worksheet form. What data or evidence? What outside opinions? What objections? And what are the ways it could go awry? Cool. All right. Let's go through an example. If we have time, I'll ask. We can do a second example, or if we just want to have a general chat and a Q&A afterwards, we can do that. Okay, so this is a situation where me as an engineer, as a BA, as a UI UX designer, doesn't matter, I'm on a project, I've got a project manager, and I'm running late. And I've not told my project manager that I'm running late. Who's ever run late on a project before? Yeah, exactly. It's just shocked that anybody would answer no to that. Or was that shock that you're always on time, and why would anybody else be not on time? So this is a situation that happens all the time. So, whoops. So what is this difficult conversation about? I'm going to read this because it's a little bit small. I'm running late on a task I was working on. The ticket said 2 days. It's been 4 days, and I'm not going to be finished anytime soon. We've all had those situations where massively behind on a project, but add into this mix that I'm a junior engineer, junior UX designer, whatever, and I'm not getting the help from my senior that I need to be able to close this ticket and work on this item. Really common situation. Seniors all the time get caught up, get waylaid, and don't give support to the juniors. Sucks, but it's the reality of the situation most of the time, and I need to tell my project manager that. So who should be involved in this conversation? Myself, obviously. The project manager, obviously. Maybe the senior. Depending on how I phrase this, depending on what I want to get out of this, the senior should probably be involved. General rule of thumb with this kind of stuff is if the senior is not in that room, I never say anything to the project manager that I haven't already said to the senior. That's a really good general rule of thumb, because otherwise, the senior could feel like I'm talking behind their back and I'm spreading rumors and that I didn't give them an opportunity to explain themselves. So if they're in the room, say whatever the hell you want. If they're not in the room, don't say anything to the project manager about the senior that you haven't already said to the senior. General culture advice. So when should I have this discussion with my project manager? Probably as soon as possible. I'm already 4 days into a ticket that should have taken 2 days, so I should really be talking to them about this as soon as I can. Maybe at the daily stand-up, I can mention it. Probably not actually in the stand-up itself. Maybe I talk about it afterwards. But or maybe it could wait till the weekly cool down if it's Friday morning. But definitely pretty soon. Where should it be? Well, we don't really want the stand-up to be waylaid by this kind of stuff, and it could have a personal dynamic to it, so I probably shouldn't bring it up in there. I should mention it and waylay it. We should definitely do it somewhere private, maybe a one-to-one call. If we're in person, if we're not hybrid or remote working, maybe in a private meeting room. But this is potentially, I'm going to say something about my senior that they're not helping me, so maybe I shouldn't say that in public. That's just what I'm talking about there. Okay. Any questions on that framing and logistics of this difficult conversation?
Okay, so in this instance, you have a project manager and you have your senior, and it is your senior who is not lending much support. So how do you go about it? Because you are caught in between. You are escalating to the project manager, but it is your senior who is not giving you.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm presuming in this example that I've already had the conversations with the senior. So I'm presuming that I've had these conversations and they've not been successful. That's kind of why we've got to the situation we're in. If we imagine that I hadn't talked to my senior yet, you could use exactly the same model, exactly the same approach to plan how you could talk to the senior. And maybe that will be a good exercise for you to think about that and kind of go, what if I was the junior, how would I use this model to talk to the senior before it escalated to this point? That could be a good thing to think through. Have a think about it. If you stay afterwards, we can talk about what that could look like. Any more questions before we move on? No. Awesome. Cool. All right. So mindset. How am I putting myself in the right place to have this difficult conversation? So why is it in my best interests to talk to my project manager about why I'm behind on this ticket? I finished this ticket. We all know what it's like. You've been working on this thing and bashing your head against this thing. I just want to work on something different. I don't want to work on the same thing. So it's in my interest because I get to work on something interesting. And I also stop feeling uncomfortable. We know what it's like. Stand up. What have you been working on yesterday? What are you working on today? Oh, it's the same thing I've said 5 times. Like that starts to feel a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? So I can stop feeling that uncomfortableness and also build a little trust with my project manager. Being vulnerable and open with people actually builds trust with them. Talking about what we've not been able to do and what our limits are, done in the right way, builds trust with people. So why is it in the best interest of the project manager for me to have this conversation? Well, they're making assumptions about how long the project is going to take, different things interacting with other things. They've got a missing piece of information here. It's pretty obvious why it's in their best interest. And they'd rather know about it sooner rather than later so that they can prioritize helping me out. Pretty obvious. Why is it in my team's best interest? Well, they're waiting for me to do things. They're waiting for me. We've got this interconnecting web of tickets that every team has. And for me to finish something means they can start something and it all connects together. So my team wants me to help. But also the trust element as well. When we're talking about building culture in a team and having the team we want to work in, whether we're a leader or not a leader by title, the way we do that is by emulating the behavior we want others to give back to us. And so me talking about me being late and being honest and open and discussing that tends to breed that dynamic in the team and other people start doing the same. So that's why it's in the best interest. I want to work in a team that has that dynamic, and the best way I work in a team that has that dynamic is by exhibiting those behaviors. What will happen if I don't have this difficult conversation? Ticket won't get done. Simple as that. I'm stuck. I've got to the point where I can't do this piece of work and I need help. I'm not going to be able to progress. But also, you know, if I don't tell people why I'm stuck on this item, people might assume the worst. A general rule of thumb is people will always assume a worse answer than the reality. If you don't give people information, they assume the worst. They assume that I'm incompetent, they assume I'm not good at my job. It sucks, it shouldn't be that way. Human beings are annoying, but human beings are that way. If we don't give somebody information, they assume the worst. So by me talking about it, I close that gap. So any questions on mindset before we move on to preparation? Is that pretty cool? All right, preparation. So what data or evidence can I gather to back up my claims? So here we're kind of going into a couple of things. We're going into the dynamics of it with, you know, the 2 days, 4 days thing. It's pretty obvious. That's not something that we need to dwell on too much. But you know, there's also this element of Jeff, my senior, and you know, the fact that I've asked him, like I can show that I've asked him a few different times. Again, this is where you get in that tricky dynamic. Is Jeff in the room? Is Jeff not in the room? That changes how you approach this, but you know, gathering the data of how often I've tried to speak to him is definitely important there. And also an element of proving that I've done the work to try and solve this myself, showing that I've Googled and Stack Overflowed to my heart's content and I can't solve it. Are there any outside opinions? So a couple of opinions here, which because here we've got the dynamic of the work not being done, but also the dynamic of the situation with Jeff. So getting those gathered might be useful. So, you know, I spoke to Sally and Sally said that, you know, Jeff was the same and wasn't helping her when he was her senior. But Mike said Jeff was great with him. So is it a Mike problem? Is it a me problem? Is it an underlying problem in our team? It's hard to tell, but hey, here's some data and perspectives. But on the actual work item, you know, Jessica mentioned that she saw a similar problem. So you can just see that all I'm doing here is what we discussed earlier of just getting these outside opinions. They might not be useful. You can see I'm skipping through this because the actual items aren't useful potentially, but just gathering those opinions and gathering that data means that however the conversation goes, I've got it in front of me and I can answer any questions that are asked. Lastly, objections. So, you know, I didn't try hard enough. Well, I tried really hard. I don't think my PM will say that, but I can prove that I have tried really hard. Another thing the PM could say is I should have talked to them sooner. Yeah, should have talked to them sooner. There's nothing really I can disagree with there. Like that is definitely the case. And lastly, how could this go awry? I might not get the help I need. I don't think that's going to happen. This is why I'm raising it. But, you know, hey, if it does happen, then, you know, I need to go above my PM to get the help that I need. So this example, you can see that we started off with thinking about the conversation itself and the logistics of it, how we're going to have it. We go through the mindset of how do we get over that imposter syndrome, how do we gain the courage to have it, how do we make sure that we're thinking about it in the right way, what do we want to get out of this thing, why are we doing it in the first place, what's the outcome that we want from this, and what's the outcome that's going to help other people, and then the preparation to gather data, outside opinions, and ways this could go awry. So every time you're going to have a difficult conversation, you can use this model to prompt yourself and ask you questions about how you can approach it. Because every difficult conversation, whether it's giving somebody feedback, whether it's telling them about a situation that sucks, whether it's asking your boss for a pay rise or a promotion, whether it's denying somebody a pay rise or a promotion as a boss, whether it's an interview with somebody, all of them have these underlying elements to them, which are the logistics of the situation, the mindset and the courage to be in the right place to do it, and then the preparation to make sure it goes as successful as possible. That worksheet you can use whenever you want. Feel free to use it. We're now getting to the point where I'm going to do a time check with Kevin. Yeah. So we've got two options here. I can go into another in-depth example, which I'm perfectly willing to do, but you all might prefer beers instead of that. Or we can just do a general Q&A. Let's have thumbs up for another example, or thumbs down for Q&A, and we'll jump straight to Q&A. Cool, almost unanimous for skipping to Q&A. For those of you who wanted the other example, the slide deck you'll get at the end, and you can look at that at the end. Cool. So the other example, if you're curious, was to give somebody feedback about playing with their phone during a meeting, which is something that I've had to give feedback on as a boss way more times than I would like. Yeah, let's skip through that. Okay, so I'm not going to nail this point. I've just said it a minute ago, but mindset and preparation and courage. The last point that I mentioned is confident, not comfortable. You see that in all of this, it's not about overriding Jeff. It's not about putting my project manager in a place where I'm trying to manipulate her. It's about trying to be confident in approaching these situations because they are inherently challenging. And if you can go into that feeling more confident, then I've met my aim in what I tried to do tonight. I don't want you to forget that at the end of the day, this is a conversation between one or more humans, and those humans have emotions, thoughts, desires of their own. And if you start feeling like you're comfortable in having these conversations and that you don't care about their thoughts, feelings, and desires, then I've gone too far. And we should be just confident, not comfortable. Cool. All right. So there is another QR code for the worksheet there. There's a QR code for my LinkedIn if you want to connect on LinkedIn. There is also a couple of things here. So if you want to learn more about debugging leadership, that's the Debugging Leadership website. Shows you all of the online training courses that I've got, which you can subscribe to. But the other thing, as a thank you for letting me do this talk tonight, is this is actually a full training course which I am paid by clients to deliver, and it's there for free. Goes into all of this in much more detail with more examples. I'm not doing that thing where I'm capturing your email address and I'm going to mark it to you. No, you just go to that URL and the training course is there and available and free. And that's just my thank you for letting me talk at you for 45 minutes. Cool. All right, let's move into Q&A. So Q&A about anything to do with what we've talked about tonight. Any of the elements of it, aspects, questions, comments, suggestions?
You seem very touchy-feely. How does that matter to dealing with Australians?
So that's really, really interesting. This is being recorded. So I'm changing what I was going to say in the moment. Australians are not what you think they are. Australians actually are more open about this kind of stuff than you might expect. They're more, that wall between what they feel and what they say, that, as English people, there's often two conversations going on in any English conversation. There's what people say and what people mean, and they're never connected to each other, or rarely connected to each other.
Like the classic, are you all right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? With Australians, that wall doesn't exist. They say exactly what they mean. And they presume that you are saying exactly what you mean. And so actually, this way of leading goes across really well. Because, when I used to work in the UK, and I used to, be the leader that I am, which is eventually the compassionate leader that I am, often people believed that I had an ulterior motive. And they believed that I was trying to manipulate them and get them to do something that is not in their own interests, because how could somebody actually put the needs of the human against the needs of the company? I do a lot of coaching and mentoring in Australia, and often companies will pay me to coach their employees, so it's not the person that's paying me, it's the company. And the first thing I'll say to that company is, I'm not coaching your employee, I'm coaching the human. And what that means is, if I genuinely believe that the best advice for that human is to leave your company, that'll be the advice that I give them. And I say that, and I'm very successful in doing that coaching and mentoring, because they understand that honesty and the compassion that comes with that honesty is really important. So not always what you believe. Any more questions?
I want to say one thing. I think English people is not like you think they are.
Interesting. Why?
I'm not English. No. I don't want to start in problems at all.
Sounds like pub talk.
No. But it's nice the thing that you say about another culture, how different are, how challenging to you is going to another country, etc. And finally, we are humans.
Yeah.
Even many difficulties, many bias, many culture anchoring roots, but it's amazing.
Yeah. I used to work with one of the people that trained Apple's managers. And he had a great saying, which is, humans are simple, individuals are complex. And what he meant by that is, everybody uses the same underlying algorithms in their brains, like, where we all evolved in the same way. And so there are certain things that are the same between people, but the way that they're expressed might be different. So, the way that people react to things is generally the same, but colored by their own interpretations. And so, you can start spotting patterns as a leader. You can start seeing that, people tend to react to this thing in this particular way, but you have to color that with what you know about that individual. Like a huge amount, say for example, I was to join a company and I was to pick up leadership of a team. I did this recently, so just after COVID, I joined a company, and I was leading a team of about 50 people. And I spent the first 3 months doing nothing but talking to those 50 people and just trying to understand them, understand the dynamics, understand the nature of how everybody talks to each other, and using that to feed into what I wanted to do and what I wanted to achieve. You can't beat just having discussions with people and understanding them as a leader. It's incredibly valuable. Any more questions?
You mentioned earlier that you've let a lot of people go from your team. How do you manage the team afterwards? Because when people leave, the whole team is depressed. Who's next?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So for those who didn't catch it, the question was, how do you handle the team that stays after you let a lot of people go? This could be an entire talk by itself. There's a whole heap of stuff that comes into it. And honestly, the first thing people think of is that people have fear that they're next. That's what everybody jumps to as the first thing that you should deal with as a leader, and it's not. The first thing is survivor fear or survivor guilt. Why them and not me? I worked for Linktree, if anybody knows Linktree. So we had a round of redundancies, and I had to let a few people go. And the people that stayed, there was a young lady who had done a career conversion. She used to be an accountant. And this job at Linktree was her first ever job as a software engineer. And she was not let go. And yet somebody who had 15 years experience and had been at Linktree for 4 years was let go. And in her mind, she's thinking, that person is so much more valuable to Linktree than me. Why have they been let go and I haven't? And so that's the first thing you have to deal with, is actually survivor guilt, of talking to these people about why that's the case. This is not about individuals. This is about roles. This is about teams. This is about places within the organization. And there are certain laws and how you approach these things. And you've got to deal with that survivorship guilt first. Then you just have to accept a reduction in productivity. You just have to. A month, 2 months after you have a huge round of redundancies, productivity is going to hit the floor. The week after you have a redundancies, you're going to get no work done. The week afterwards, you're going to get a little bit of work done, and then it's going to slowly climb up again. But yeah, it's I can do an entire talk on how you do these things effectively and compassionately. But at the end of the day, they still suck. And at the end of the day, humans are losing their jobs, and it's bad. But it's the reality of the business world. In some situations when I've had redundancies, it's because if we didn't have them, then the company would have folded because we couldn't afford to pay the salaries. and that's a pretty simple situation to talk to your team about. Yes, it sucks, but do you want a job or not?
Which is back to the best outcome for everybody.
Exactly. Spot on. Back to what's best for everybody. Any more questions? Yep.
I think you alluded to potentially building structures to allow difficult conversations in public. What kind of things would that be?
So as a general rule, don't. As a general rule, don't have difficult conversations in public. You can build trust with a team such that you can do that, but it takes a very long time, and it takes dynamics of psychological safety. I say the word psychological safety, and often people think that means you don't have conflict in a team, but that's not what psychological safety means. What it actually means is you have a lot of conflict. It's just that conflict is healthy conflict. It's conflict that isn't challenging, and it's conflict where the best idea wins, not the loudest person. So there are ways to have a high conflict, psychologically safe environment. And in those circumstances, if you built that in a team, you can start having some of these conversations in public. If the conversations are about the output somebody has made, not about their actions or their behaviors, those things should always be in private.
Yeah, it just seems interesting because it feels like it'd be quite in certain, I guess, a lot of the stuff we do is team-based. Kind of feels like it would be good if you could build that into a lot more teams so that people can talk about feedback a bit more openly with each other.
Sure. I 100% agree, feedback, but feedback about people's output, not feedback about people themselves. Like that's the line to draw. And if I'm going to tell you that the code that you've produced isn't well structured and isn't meeting the quality standards and the unit tests aren't passing, or there's not enough coverage, or whatever the thing that you have produced, definitely the aim should be as a team to have those discussions in public, because we can all learn from that. Somebody else can learn from the mistake that you made in producing that output. Somebody else can learn on how you have those discussions. But if I'm going to say to you, hey, I noticed that you were on Facebook for 4 hours today, or probably not Facebook, it's probably Mastodon nowadays, isn't it? You're on Mastodon for 4 hours, or you're taking too many personal calls at work or whatever. Like, it's about you and your actions that should really stay private.
Do you think, I suppose, retrospectives on sprints and stuff like they are like a form of that kind of thing?
They are, but this is back to my general rule about feedback, which is you're asking some really good questions, and I feel like I could do an entire series of talks on diving into this stuff. But the general rule on feedback is the timely the feedback, the better. So, if you do something or you produce an output and I wait a year to give you feedback, it's entirely pointless. But if I wait a month to give you feedback, or 2 weeks, you could have forgotten, you could have not remember the exact details. You could not have remembered, oh yeah, that was the day that, I found out my grandma's cat died or something. Like there could have been something in the moment that you don't remember 2 weeks later. And so, general rule is if you're going to give feedback, give it as soon as possible. You can then reiterate it and discuss it in detail in a retrospective. So, when I'm coaching leaders on how to give feedback with somebody, the absolute golden rule is if you're doing a performance review with somebody, especially if it's negative, and especially if they're on a performance improvement plan leading towards a place they don't want to be, nothing you say to them should be a surprise. You should already have said the thing you're going to say to them. You're just saying it again in a more formal structure, in a more formal ceremony. That's the golden rule to live by. Any more questions?
What about if the difficult conversation you need to have is going to create a problem? So let's say you need them to be super motivated, super confident themselves, and you need to give them some feedback that undermines that confidence.
Sure, but that's why we go through the what do we want to get out of this? And one of the things we want to get out of this is that they stay productive. And we can sometimes accept a down for an up, but if you picture a graph, and this is not going to go over on camera, so sorry everybody who's watching this online, but if you're picturing a graph of productivity, hang on, reverse because you're on the other side. So if their productivity is here and we're going to dip down, what we're hoping is their productivity goes up higher than where it started. So we overcome the fact that we had a reduction in productivity. If we're going down and we're staying down, then something else is wrong, and you've messed something else up.
More meant more from equivalent to technical debt, where you need to not do it now because it's going to cost you too much now. You need to have it later.
Sure, that's definitely something that you should consider. Your cultural debt is a real thing. And what you're talking about there, and using the analogies to technical debt, is cultural debt. And building up this idea that with tech debt, we do something that we know is suboptimal in the long term for a short-term gain. Cultural debt is exactly the same. We're doing something that we know is suboptimal in the long term for a short-term gain. So, and this is kind of going into the 201s and the 301s and the higher level discussions, but you definitely could see a situation where you decide not to give somebody feedback now, knowing that it's going to reduce their long-term productivity, but you've got a short-term target to meet. That's something that really you're starting to get into what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for their long-term success as an individual? Are you optimizing for the team's success? Are you optimizing for the organization's success? Or the success of the users of the software you're creating? And this is something that we're balancing all the time as teams, and especially as leaders, is, sometimes I will be explicit to somebody, and somebody I'm leading, and I'll say to them, hey, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to tell you two things, and they're at conflict with each other. Because one of them is what's in your best interest as an individual, and the other one is what's in the best interest of the organization. And I'm not going to tell you which one to choose. I'm going to give you both options, and I'm not going to value judge which choice you make, because I don't know which one I would make unless I was in that situation. So that is hard. Yeah. Any more questions?
I suppose some of those things can sometimes go in your favour. Back to the long-term debt. If you've got somebody who is probably going to go.
Sure, exactly.
And the best thing to do is just leave them working now to get what you need done, rather than addressing something and just finish it off.
Definitely. And again,
back to what are you going to get out for yourself?
Yeah, and back. I could talk about this for hours, but back to the point about letting somebody go. I have in the past quite a few times. The rule that I go by when you put somebody on a performance improvement plan, for those of you who don't know, a performance improvement plan is like the first step on legally letting somebody go if it's not part of a redundancy. So if you're going to get rid of somebody for performance reasons, you've got to put them on a performance improvement plan first. my golden rule for performance improvement plans is I've got to put somebody in a situation in which I would expect them to succeed. I've got to support them as much as I possibly can to succeed. And I've got to document when they fail. And it's as simple as that. The first two are incredibly important. Even though I know that this is a waste of resources, and even though I know that it's the worst thing in the short term, I'm balancing that long-term success of the organization and going that, yes, I'm over-investing in this person right now, but that means that morally and ethically, I feel like I did right by them because I didn't put them in a place that I didn't expect them to succeed. And I'm doing the right thing by the organization in that I'm moving them on from the organization. It's hard.
I suppose that comes down to you're obliged to do that anyway legally.
Yeah.
So if you put that effort in, it's no worse than if they don't succeed, you've not lost anything. But if you put that effort in and they do succeed,
sure,
you've actually gained.
Yeah, and I've probably done 7 or 8 of those in my career as a leader, and 1 or 2 of them have come out of a performance improvement plan. Sometimes in the role, one of them in a role in which they started, one of them in a slightly different role, where it's a case of, hey, you weren't succeeding in this role, but maybe we can put you in a role that's more suited to what you want. But yeah, again, it's back to what I said about, being compassionate to the human being and, not. So there was somebody who I went through the performance improvement plan, and the result was that they were going to be let go. And I did not sleep that night at all. I was stressed, I was sweating, I was a mess. Because, even though I was confident that I'd done it all by the book legally, and I'd done it to what I felt was the right moral and ethical standard, it still sucked. It was not a nice situation.
I suppose also framing without emotion, if I portray it correctly, is beneficial. If you've got someone that isn't performing, it's better to target where you want to go, and the way you want to go is them performing.
Yes.
Rather than telling them that they're useless.
No, 100%. Yeah.
Which is, that's the emotion. That's how you're feeling right now.
Yeah.
You're useless. You're bringing the team down.
Yeah. Well, this is
This
back to that camera lens point. You'll see that on the second example if you go through that second example, because that's more of a performance feedback thing. That camera lens is incredibly important because that's how you stop yourself being emotionally connected to what you perceive as the intent or you perceive as the desires behind somebody. You should never be giving somebody performance feedback and assuming intent. It should be as objective as possible. That timing out means we spent a very long time on this slide. So I might call it there and say, thank you very much. Please go through the course if you want. There's a lot more detail in that. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I need to get better about sharing resources on LinkedIn, but I do try my best and share this kind of stuff. If you like being that touchy-feely leader, or you want to learn more about what that means, then that's the stuff that I live and breathe and talk about all the time. So, thank you.
Thank you.